back to basics. That's what we're here to talk about today. And today's guest is Peter Benito. Peter has been doing lacto-fermentation for over 10 years?
About 10 years.
Yeah. And so you've probably never heard of lacto-fermentation, but you probably have eaten the products. If you've gone to a baseball game and you've had sauerkraut on your hot dog, you've probably had lacto-fermentation. So it's not a disease, but it's just a process. So people have tried pickles as a preservative, and so we have some pickles here today. And this is what I knew about preserving, because this is what everybody does. You take vegetables out of your garden and you cut them up when they're nice and fresh. You put them in salt or brine and things like that, and you put them in vinegar. And that's what I knew about.
Yeah, so, we have this sort of generic title of food preservation, and then we have our little dichotomy in there, and that is we have pickling and then we have a fermentation.
Right.
And so both are methods of food preservation, but we're performing two different functions here. And one, we're building this bacteria that's going to be really helpful to our bodies and really helpful to our guts and even to our minds, which is something we can talk about later.
Right.
And on the other hand, we have this nice thing where we're preserving our food, but we're not necessarily building that healthy gut bacteria as a result, and that's where the difference kind of comes in.
Because we were talking even a couple of years ago, and I really had not thought about it, because I was talking about pickling cucumbers, and you were saying to put them in salt, and I was like, what is he talking about? I've never ever heard of this. Putting them into a salt mixture. So what we're going to talk about today is sauerkraut and kimchi. And you probably have tried sauerkraut, but you may not have tried kimchi.
Yes, you may not have tried kimchi, but you should.
If you have tried kimchi, you've tried kimchi.
Yes.
Yeah, and everybody around you has known.
It.
Right.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the history, just slightly. Sauerkraut is a pretty much German.
So it's a German word, and so mostly we're coming from Europe with it. There's examples of it in different parts of Europe, probably based on the name. I'm not certain where it started, but you would think based on the name that would be the area that it started in, and kind of spread from there. But there's a real rich history from it, going back to even Columbus's records of when he was exploring the world. They would bring sauerkraut with them as a means of combating scurvy.
Right.
Most of us think about citrus fruit or something like that because it's high in vitamin C, combating scurvy, but actually a vegetable like cabbage is really high in vitamin C, and one of the wonderful things that fermentation does is it actually enhances that quality of it and actually preserves that quality of it over a long period of time.
Right, and I learned that it's actually better for you when it's fermented than it is when it's just plain cabbage.
Well, one of the really interesting things about all these wonderful vegetables that we have in our life is there are particular things in them that our body can have trouble with, whether it's an oxalic acid or something like that. Your kidneys may not do well with it, whatever it may be. It needs to get purged through your bloodstream. It could come out through your skin, things like that. It's certainly nothing to be scared of. There are certain diets around the world where they try to avoid consuming high amounts of certain vegetables like nightshades and things like that because of a high oxalic acid content. But these things get neutralized through a fermentation process. So all of a sudden you're taking this thing, which is really good for you in the beginning, and making it even better for you. So there's this added benefit to it.
Yeah. And then kimchi. Yes. Did that start in China or?
It's Korean.
Korean. Okay, of course. Korean. Yes. Yep.
It's actually the national dish of Korea.
And that's a main dish. It's not like a vegetable side dish.
It is not a side dish for them. They take their kimchi very seriously. They estimate that Koreans eat about a pound of kimchi a day, and that's per person.
Right. And that's quite a bit when you think about it. You put it in a bowl. That's a whole bowl full of
if we're looking at like this kimchi right here, and we're looking at 16 ounces, we're talking about a pound.
Right. So half of that jar.
Right there.
Yeah. And now, they have different methods of using it. or making it. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But also, I've heard about the, putting it in the ground. But there's also different places that make kimchi in different ways and different times of the year and the different products.
Yeah, so, the kimchi that we may have most available to us here in the U.S. may be, quite different from what they're eating over in Korea. Often their cabbage is somewhat spoiled before they start it. And that sounds really gross, but, it's all a matter of what you're used to, what your taste buds like. And then they will often start with salt, and we'll get into using salt later.
Right,
but,
right.
And then they'll actually wash the salt off. So the final product is very hot and spicy typically, but not very salty. Once the salt has kind of done its job, it's sort of removed from the equation, which is quite a bit different than what we're used to here.
Right. Yeah, because we do have, you can taste the salt. Another thing that they use is like a broth, a meat broth sometimes to put it into, because all these things you think of as they're going to go bad.
Yes.
But they don't. I mean, because of the process, and they've been doing it for a long time. And one thing that I do want to mention to everybody too is, if you are going to try any of these, don't just go out and buy a jar and eat the whole jar all at one time, because they are good for you, but that can turn around and not be so good for you too. So
right. Well, we're dealing with our body, which is its own delicate ecosystem and very unique, and we have a certain established gut bacteria, and a lot of that is based on what we've been consuming. And so taking this whole other environment, because what we're really looking at here is a microbiological environment, and you're introducing it to your own. And, it's really something that you want to introduce in a gradual way.
Right.
You're not going to get hurt, but you might upset your system, and then you won't want to eat it again, and that's certainly not what we want.
Yeah. So there are a lot of health benefits. I was reading a little bit about, let's see, canker sores. If you have a canker sore, you can take the liquid from sauerkraut, and you can put that in your mouth and swish it around a little bit. You can also take the sauerkraut and put it in your mouth, and that should help to get rid of canker sores. What I also did a little bit of reading on is your intestines, how good these products are for your intestines to take in nutrients and to make things healthy.
Sure. Well, when we look at nutrients, it's really a game of what's available to your body in the food that you're eating. You may have a really nutrient-dense food, but if there are certain catalysts or things in it that allow your body or don't allow your body to take full advantage of it, then you're not going to get anything, or not anything, but not everything from it. And then, when we're talking about a fermentation, a lot of those things are swung in our favor, so that we really can reap all the benefits from it. When you talk about intestines, and we really get into a discussion about immunity in our immune system, and it's theorized that about 70% of our immune function is based on the gut bacteria that we have. So,
I think we've forgotten about all of these things, because life gets so busy now that we've kind of thought that we as humans control everything, but our bodies control a lot about what happens to us and how healthy we are.
It's really a big game of bacteria.
It is.
It's difficult to think of your body as its own ecosystem, but you really need to. If you look at the percentage of human cells to what we would consider to be foreign bacteria cells, I think everyone would be really surprised of, our body composition. But then it makes sense that we need these things with this good bacteria in it to help us really be, achieving that full state of health.
Right. So, back a long time ago, back in the Civil War even, I read another thing where during the Civil War, one of the doctors had given it to, or sauerkraut, had given that to some of the people that were ailing, and it helped them stay really healthy. Again, probably the vitamin C and all the vitamins that were in it. So let's talk a little bit about what you can make sauerkraut or kimchi out of.
Sure.
Okay, or even any kind of lacto-fermented vegetables. So where do we start?
Well, you can really ferment anything, which is great, but the thing that most people start with and are probably most familiar with is starting with cabbage. Cabbage and salt, and that would be your most basic lacto-fermentation, is having a big head of cabbage and some salt and doing your mixture like that. And, I think it can seem really intimidating at first. When I first started doing this, I was probably 18, and none of my other 18-year-old friends were lacto-fermenting, so
Right.
it was kind of this thing that I was venturing to on my own, and they weren't good when I first started.
Yeah.
And maybe I hadn't acquired the taste for it.
Right.
And
Yeah.
maybe they taste the same now,
and
but I just
there's
like
a balance
them
there too. I mean, like knowing how much salt to use, or how much of this
Yes.
and that, or mixing your spices or vegetables.
So it's
Yeah.
this wonderful thing where you can kind of play mad scientist in your kitchen, because it's really a matter of what you like.
Right.
Someone may like a really, really salty sauerkraut, and someone may like one that's not that very salty at all.
Right.
And there are different things that are going to happen with your batch as a result of that. The more salt that you put in it, the longer it's going to take to ferment, but the longer you will be able to store it for, because when we finish our fermentation, it's not really finished. We're taking it from our storage space and we're putting it into our refrigerator, and the cold temperature will slow down the fermentation process quite a bit, but it never really stops.
Right. I've had jars where they kept bubbling. I mean,
Yeah.
you have to be careful. Like I had a jar actually once that I put in my cupboard, and I went to go get it, and you could see where the pressure had seeped some of the liquid out.
Sure.
Because it's still pretty gaseous in there.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on there.
I keep mine under my sink in whatever fermentation vessel, and that's in a bucket.
Right. For a good reason. Yeah.
Some of them bubble over, and you don't want to be cleaning kimchi juice
Yeah.
off of the wood,
Right.
in your cabinets, but
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of companies out there that are making lacto-fermented vegetables. One of the ones that I really like is Micro Mama, and this one here is this is their spicy kimchi, but I've also had some of their other products, and really they're absolutely delicious. But this is not the only company that makes these things.
She is local, though,
Yes,
which
she is,
nice.
yeah.
She's in New Hampshire, which is over in the
Right.
Henniker area.
Yes,
And she
yep.
does all small batch stuff by hand, so
Yeah.
it's really...
Yeah, I actually went to a workshop over the summer and saw her, how she was making it and things. It was really nice to get to know the person that was making it. But then again, there's other companies. We've got a couple of other ones here. Here's another Micro Mama product here. This one is Silly Dilly carrots. And then, Peter, you said that you've tried these other two kimchis that we have here.
Yeah, so this one here is from Real Pickles, and they have a whole line of fermentation that they do. And one of the nice things about them is they try to use mostly Northeast grown ingredients, and they will let you know on the label what things were grown in the Northeast.
Great.
And one of the things that I can say about trying all of these is that every single one is different.
Right.
And when you make them yourself, every single one is different.
Right, right.
Even when you do the same thing, each time they're going to be a little bit different.
yeah.
This one right here is Sunja, and I would say this is probably the most close to authentic Korean kimchi that you can get locally. She's in Waterbury, Vermont, so she's somewhat local as well, and she makes a really nice product. It's traditional in the sense of the way that her fermentation is done. It's very low in sodium, that one. I think a lot of people are worried about sodium, and when you look at the amount of salt that can be used in lacto-fermentation, it can be a little disheartening if you've been told to be on a low-salt diet.
Right.
And she does a more traditional method where a lot of the salt is washed off of the cabbage before it's packed.
Yeah, hers is a lot more chunky too than like the Micro Mama's. Micro Mama's is more shredded, and theirs is more like cut up vegetables.
Yeah, and she uses a lot of Napa cabbage, and it's just a different type of cabbage.
It
That's
is.
what's
It's a totally
traditionally
different,
used
totally
over there.
different flavor.
If you see images of them making kimchi in Korea, they have a whole head of Napa cabbage, and they literally fold back the leaves and rub their spice mixture in there, and then this whole cabbage gets fermented. It's not, it doesn't look like the shredded sort of thing that we're more used to here.
Yeah.
I prefer the more shredded one, but it's
It's
all a matter
personal.
of taste.
Yeah, right. So we've talked a little bit about what we can buy. And what I would suggest, and I don't know about you, but I would suggest that you just go out and buy a couple to see what the different flavors are so that you can get an idea of what you're looking for in your own, because it's not that hard to make. And the other thing we haven't talked about too is that you can use salt, but you can also use whey.
Yes.
And so tell me a little bit about this.
So we have our salt lacto-fermentation, and essentially what the salt is doing is creating this nice stable environment that our salt-resistant bacteria is going to grow in, and that's our lactobacillus bacteria, the bacteria that we want, the bacteria that works in conjunction with the bacteria in our stomach, the one that's going to have all these health benefits. And so the difference with that in whey is, whey is sort of this byproduct of yogurt making or kefir making or even cheese making. And what that is going to do, because it already has this prevalence of this lactobacillus culture in it, it's going to really make your fermentation happen a lot quicker. And it'll add a broader spectrum of, microbiological things to it. Some people ferment with just whey. I think if you're interested in using whey in your fermentation, the best thing to do would be to do like 2 parts salt to 1 part whey. The one thing that gets tricky about doing just whey in your fermentation is you don't have the salt to inhibit the growth of that bad bacteria, and if you get too much oxygen into your fermentation, then you're more likely to have bad bacteria growth.
Right. And when you are making your sauerkraut or your kimchi, from what I understand, you should take your vessel, whatever you're going to use, and make sure that you push all of your vegetables down underneath the juice too, because that's where you can have a lot of bacteria grow too.
So we have these 2 types of bacterial growth that exist. There are anaerobic and are aerobic, and what we want is anaerobic. That's this good bacteria that we want, and aerobic bacteria really does well with a lot of oxygen. So what we want to do is reduce the amount of oxygen that they have to feed off of. So when we take our shredded cabbage and we pack it into our fermentation vessel really tight, we're reducing the oxygen level in there, and therefore creating a situation where that bad bacteria is being inhibited. Now you take that and you add it to the combination of having salt in there, which also does the same sort of thing, and now you have this really, really sterile environment in terms of inhibiting the growth of bad bacteria.
Right.
So, I think a lot of people can probably be scared of when they're getting started of eating it and getting sick or something like that. It's really easy to trust what we buy in stores because this is a professional doing it, and we're not professionals.
Yeah.
But, this is one of those situations where I think through, a little bit of trial and error and practice, we can really gain trust in ourselves and our ability to do these things, because, you'll see as long as you create this nice environment, which isn't that difficult, you're going to get good results out of it.
Right. And they have airlocks, too, that you can buy.
Yes,
so tell me a little bit about what you would put your products into.
I use a 1-gallon glass mason jar. I do a gallon at a time, which is a really big batch, and we probably, at my house, between my wife and my daughter and I, go through a gallon a week. So I always have something fermenting.
Right.
So as soon as one's ready, another one's begun.
What a healthy family. Yeah.
We're trying.
Yeah. So what are some of the things that you like to make your kimchi or your... Do you make sauerkraut or do you make more kimchi?
I probably make kimchi more, just because I'm really a fan of like funky, sour flavors. I love it. I didn't used to, but all this fermented food over the years, I just love it.
Yeah.
And so I will make my kimchi typically with cabbage, carrots, garlic, ginger, daikon radish, and all these things are optional.
Right.
And some hot pepper, but I don't make it too spicy because
that sounds delicious.
Like
I think
things that are overly spicy.
Yeah, your combination sounds absolutely delicious, and it sounds again a lot like this one that I've had with the Micro Mama, the spicy kimchi, because her ingredients are cabbage, carrots, garlic, ginger, scallions, Bolivian rose salt. That's another thing that we should talk about is what kind of salt to use, and then chilies, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
So.
And scallions was one of the ones I forgot to mention that you said, because I feel like it gives us this wonderful flavor. But the onion family to me is just
There's so many things that are good for you that if you just take the time to learn a little bit about it, or like with things like this, I eat these as a side. Again, they eat them as their main meal. But like if you're eating a meat or something or fish, or they complement your dish so much to have these things as side besides
They
with
do.
your meal.
I feel like they'll bring out flavors in the other food that you never really noticed before.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, and there's a lot of worry out there about things that you're eating being carcinogenic, and you know, they say, oh, you know, you don't grill your meat because if the flame touches it, it'll build carcinogen and things like that. And one of the things that a lacto-fermented vegetable can do is neutralize that.
Right.
So if you love to, you know, drink beer and eat meat, which I do love to do, then adding some kimchi or some sauerkraut
Makes
to
it
that
healthy.
is a wonderful thing.
Right,
you
right,
know?
yeah. But you know, even when you're eating though, you know, like I like to have something like, say you're having a steak.
Yes.
You know, you've got this steak, but it's kind of nice to have something that's got a little crunch to it, that's got a little spice to it. You know, you can have it with a baked potato or something like that, but it adds to your entire meal. And again, it's good for you. So,
Yeah, it really does.
yeah.
I mean, I feel like it's this introduction to a whole world of flavors
It
that
is.
you've never
It
experienced
is. It's like
before.
somebody that has never used herbs before. You know, it's just that added, it just tastes good. So sea salt.
Yes.
Do you use sea salt or do you use other salts?
I use sea salt, and I try to buy the gray sea salt. You'll see sea salt in really 3 different colors now. One is like a pink or a red, another is white, and the last one is gray. You know, the color in the pink and the red is a really great indication of being really dense in nutrients. The gray sea salt, I feel like, just gives a great flavor, and the white would give the same flavor. The gray just has a higher mineral content because it hasn't, they haven't fully evaporated all the seawater from it, and that's why it retains that gray sort of hue to it.
So is it gray when it starts out, and then as they process it, it turns white?
Yeah, it
And
gets
is it
white
from a
through
different
the
area, or-
processing. Most of the gray sea salt that people recommend is right off of the French coast. That's the one that gets the, you know, most talk. But,
Yeah.
you know, really any sea salt will work. What you don't want to be using is just a regular table salt.
Right,
That's
right.
not going to give you, you know, what you're looking for in your fermentation, and it's also not going to give you the same health benefits that you're looking for.
Right, right. So if someone was going to be interested in learning more about making sauerkraut or kimchi, what would you suggest? Like, you know, what was your journey besides the fact that you practiced a lot when you were younger?
Well, yeah, I mean, I didn't have YouTube when I was younger, but it exists now, and so, you know, I feel like it's this really wonderful tool where you can actually bring someone into your home, in a sense, and watch them do it.
Right.
The way that I learned how to do it was trial and error. You know, I got some books, and they told me how it was supposed to happen, and I tried it, and you know, it went okay, and then it started going well, and you know, now it goes really well,
Right.
and we devour it
Yeah.
at home.
Isn't it amazing? Because I really find that having somebody show me, you know, like it's not hard to make this stuff. You pretty
No.
much shred it, you put the ingredients in, you mix them around, make sure that the juices are starting to flow, and you put it in a bottle. I mean, I know that's simple, but
It's true,
that's
though,
pretty much what
because
you do.
Really, we don't have to do much of the work.
Right.
You know, at home I have a big giant glass bowl that I use because I like to pound the cabbage to release some of the juice from it. So I'll shred my cabbage, I'll put it in my glass bowl. I have a wooden mallet, and you know, it's a lot of fun, and I
Yeah.
just pound it.
Yeah.
I have a friend who takes her hands and she just squeezes it and punches it.
Yeah.
And what this does is it releases quite a bit of the juice from it, especially since you've put salt on it at this point, that should be said. So the salt is drawing the water out of it, and then you're doing the same thing by pounding it, and you don't have to do this,
Right.
but it's nice if you have a stressful job or something. It can release a lot of tension.
So you could actually have people pay you to do this for them, or they could pay
sure.
you for making your.
Yeah, I would gladly be paid to pound people's cabbage for them. And
You
then
never know,
at
this
that
could be a
point-
business someday. You never know.
Could be.
Yeah.
And then at that point, you just take it, you pack it into your fermentation vessel, pack it really tight, seal it up, and then you let the bacteria
Right.
do all the work.
Right.
It should be said that, you know, a lot of people, I think, are hesitant to leave the jar open, and that does leave it more prone to having a bad bacterial contamination, especially on top. And so you can take a mason jar and completely shut the lid really tight, but as the carbon dioxide gets released by the bacteria that are consuming sugar in there, you need to what
Release
we would
that.
call burp it,
Yeah.
and just open up your jar and let a little bit of the air out and then close it back up.
Yeah. Have you ever had a jar burst on you?
I haven't, but in the beginning when I didn't really know as well, I would put large dents into the metal lids of the containers because there was so much pressure built up in there.
So you were just lucky.
Yeah, I was. I close them really tight.
Yeah. Well, let's see. What else should we tell people? What else would you give them as suggestions? Is there any place that you'd like to get your vegetables from, or is it a certain time of year that you find better?
I love to grow the ones for them or get them locally. You know, the more local and fresh the produce is, the more water content you're going to have. And then if you do decide to pound the cabbage or pack it down really tight, you're going to get all this water coming out of it. And then that's going to create your whole brine. If you had a really dry cabbage that was older and you didn't get enough water out of it, you would want to add a little bit of water to the mixture to create a brine so that the liquid level is pretty close to the top of the jar, maybe an inch away from it.
Yeah.
And what we're doing with that is just reducing that amount of oxygen that's available for the bad bacteria.
Yeah. It's so interesting, and that you can do this for yourself too. That's one of the great things.
Yeah.
So Peter, thank you very much for coming in today, and I hope that you have a better understanding about lacto-fermentation and that you'll go out and try some of these products because why not? It's good for you. It is getting back to basics, but this is the way they used to do things, and this is how we should, start thinking about what needs to be done and how we can do it ourselves.
And don't be scared because people have done it for a really long time with far less resources than we have.
That's
so nothing to be afraid of. If it doesn't look good, you can get rid of it, put it in your compost pile, run away, whatever you need to do.
So thank you very much for today. This has been great. Yeah. So I would like to just tell you to love life and live well.